and the University of Alaska Anchorage and the Alaska Domain Awareness Center at UA, the University of Alaska. We hosted our third annual Anchorage Arctic Research Summit this year as part of a broader week's worth of festivities and summits called the North by North Festival. And so this is our third year hosting North by North, and the evolution of the Anchorage Arctic Research Summit was, the first year it was wholly independent of North by North. The second year, which was last year, it came in-house at the museum. And the third year, this year, the museum took on a good chunk of the organizational responsibilities associated with the summit. And so the origins of the summit were to essentially carve out a space for Anchorage-based researchers to talk about their Arctic research. And so we've done that over the past few years. This year, what we wanted to do is sort of move the conversation and challenge researchers to think more broadly about, number one, how they do their research, and number two, how they communicate their research. And so in terms of number one, how they do the research, we were looking for presenters and practitioners who had a broader base of defining a research scope and research project was more, so projects that are more community driven and responsive to community needs and ways of doing research and thinking about research and scholarship. And so we were really looking for that as a way of talking about how we can transform research and researchers into being more responsive to the needs of communities and more responsible than in terms of the products of their research. The second piece that we were looking for is challenging researchers and scholars to think creatively about, again, the ways they communicate research. So I think that, we can all agree that facts and knowledge to some degree is under siege, I think, both at statewide and national levels in our country. And so it becomes really important for researchers to make sure that the work that they do is accessible and understandable to broad audiences. And I think that it puts on all of us as researchers a real responsibility to make sure that we are communicating in ways that are easily understood and that, again, speak to broad audiences and also talk more about the impacts of the work that we're doing in ways that are easily understandable to general audiences, number one, but also to policymakers who will be taking information and hopefully making good, responsive, and responsible policy. So if you are, the agenda for today's meeting contains a link to the agenda that we created for our summit, and so I won't go into the detail of that, but suffice it to say that we really tried to create an agenda for the day that would think about transforming research and scholarship and also looking at research and scholarship through different lenses in order, again, to make sure that different ways of knowing, different forms of wisdom, different opportunities for sharing were embedded in the day's approach. And I guess I will just end by saying that we are hoping to host our fourth annual research summit next year, continuing along this vein. I guess I'll just add one more thing. We challenged the presenters. We had two keynote presentations, and both of those keynote speakers were able to work with a communications firm here in Anchorage to, again, develop a delivery that was widely accessible in terms of its comprehensibility and also just the way that it was presented. And then the second thing we did with our panelists was we challenged them to adopt what is called an Ignite style of speaking, where they largely had, I think, one slide for every second or 7 seconds that they were talking. And we were urging those presenters to use pictures more than words to get researchers away from sort of a more typical PowerPoint format. So that's all that's all I'll have to say on that, but I'm happy to answer any questions or entertain any thoughts about potential topics for next year. We're in the process of just beginning to think about next year.
Awesome. Laura, thanks for the overview. If I could, this is Sandy. I would love to ask more questions related to the security emphasis of the meeting itself. One of the topics that this group in particular has taken up, and maybe seemingly in more of an end outcome type of approach as the observing team, we're trying to look downstream from observations themselves through the sometimes pretty complicated web of value-added products and services or knowledge development that lead to societal benefit. We've turned frequently to the International Arctic Observing Assessment Framework, which outlines Arctic societal benefit areas. And we, as a team, have sort of synthesized across a couple of those societal benefit areas to look at the issue of environmental security writ large, focusing more on environmental security. And so I think what would be helpful for this forum is to also hear some of the outcomes or conclusions you drew from the event about what the real focal areas are for thinking about economic security, environmental security, and maybe it's a stretch, but reflecting, if you could, on where the deficiencies in the Arctic observing system might be that are required to fulfill some of those outcomes.
I'll have a harder time speaking to the particularities of the Arctic observing system, and I apologize for that. I'm just not as familiar as I should be. But I think writ large, the question of security, prior to the research summit, we also had a resilience summit the day before. And that summit was also focused on environment and economic security. And I think the one thing I took away from both of those days is that it is absolutely vital that researchers do not come into communities. I mean, this is stuff we all know because thanks to IARPC now we've got a great set of standards for community-based research and protocols. That is what's incredibly important, because I think what is destabilizing is a lack of voice and a lack of opportunity to share wisdom about place. And the best people to share wisdom about place and knowledge about place are the people who live there. And so figuring out how, one of the surest pathways to security is through embedding those voices and integrating voices and having community members drive research agendas, and have researchers come in and be responsive instead of leading it. So I would just urge the work of IARPC to continue in that vein. I know that you're doing amazing work in that arena, and I think that's fundamental to both environmental and economic security. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I feel that anything we can do to make sure that we're having an expansive understanding of what knowledge is, and then letting local communities drive agendas. I will speak to, in Anchorage, we have just finished completing a climate action plan that was largely community driven. We had over 1,000 residents participate in the development of that plan. And I think that absent state and federal leadership on issues about climate adaptation and what what local governments can do, it really is up to local residents to define both the issues that they face and the potential solutions. The place that researchers come in to play, though, here is to provide the data and the science that is necessary to make good decisions.
Great. No, thank you. I think that actually was quite a kind of nourishing response for this group of people, because it is really helpful to keep hearing that reemphasized, and it does both reflect back on what you might call the more traditional aspects of the observing system. You mentioned providing data and science, and so how do we provide the best results from the more traditional kind of Western style observing system, but how do we also foster collaborations with the more indigenous knowledge system based types of observations and kind of synthetically grow an observing system that's going to meet these needs more responsively. So I appreciate those comments. Other comments or questions from the group for Mara, or reflections on the workshop if you were there?
Sandy, this is Sarah.
Oh,
Go ahead, Kelsey. I'll follow up after.
okay, I'll be incredibly brief. Thank you, Mayor, again, for organizing both of these days. I attended them in Anchorage earlier this year, and I want to echo that while these topics are gaining affluency within a number of research circles within both social and physical and natural sciences in the Arctic, there was still a major gap between the literacy on these topics of students that were attending from the UAA system. So there's still a lot of work to be done within the university system, and I'm sure at a younger age as well. So for grade school or just for individuals that are participating that are probably under the age of 25. Thanks.
Yeah, I just want to respond. So first of all, I want to say that what we did was far from perfect. This was an experiment, which I think we need to continue doing. And we had some presenters that were not at all tuned into the fact that we were seeking transformative examples. But the second thing I want to mention is we are changing the timing of this event next year so that we can capture university students and hopefully high school students while school is still in session. So this event will occur in mid-April because we recognized we had a extreme lack of under 25 voices there. So thanks for pointing that out too. That's a very important point.
So thanks for this presentation. I had heard really great things about the workshop, so thanks for covering it here today. This is Sarah Bowden from IARPC. I had just a thought and then a question. The thought is that we do have a STEM education self-forming team or working group in IARPC, and I think ensuring maybe Meredith can make connections so that the people that are talking about these outside the box education initiatives are connecting with that. They are going to be putting on a workshop in January or February. So in any event, I just think it's an interesting thing for you to connect with. The other question I had is the session on gender and research. And can you just speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, excuse me. That was really interesting for a lot of reasons. Again, this was experimental, so we dove into this, and I think, so the gender panel was interesting because among the panelists, there was only one person that said, I am a gender researcher. Everybody else who represented different countries from around the circumpolar north said they kind of came to gender issues through their other disciplinary lenses. I think that was instructive in and of itself because, again, we were challenging people to think about the lenses that you take into doing research are very much informed by who we are, whether it's a question of gender, excuse me, gender or indigeneity or immigrant or refugee status. All of these life experiences come to bear on the way that you see the world, and thus your inputs and your outputs for research are different. And I think that's the point that we were trying to just raise and think about the way that maybe gender lenses both influence research outcomes and are influenced by research outcomes, and also begin to give voice to the fact that maybe gender is not really a lens that we recognize frequently as having a positive, informative benefit in Arctic research. And I know that there's been other gender-based efforts to, like, I think in Iceland a year or two ago, there was more of a gender perspective in some of the, I think it was the Arctic Circle conference. I think this is a lens that we are all seeking to expand on and highlight, and so we took this as our introductory effort to integrate gender as a lens. I don't know if that answers your question. It was not incredibly successful, but I do think it was a good way of introducing the topic.
Thank you.
And I'm being very honest. Sorry. But I think, you know, that's the whole point of all of this, is that we all need to recognize who we are, who we take into our work, who it is that we're taking into our work as our whole selves, and the benefits that that can have, but also the blinders that that can put on us. And so this was an effort to challenge us all as researchers to think in those terms.
Great. Thanks for the question, Sarah, and Mara as well. Other questions on the forum or perspectives from attendees? Mara, I have a second question actually on, again, sort of as we're trying to build up a more maybe complete view of what the observing system, I don't even think we're at the point where we would start talking about the observing system requirements for security. I think we're really at a very kind of high level part of the conversation that I think you're speaking to really well, which is who needs to be at the table and why, to help understand what those requirements might end up looking like. I noticed that ADAC was one of the participants in your workshop and the Arctic Domain Awareness Center, and we have invited and expect to hear from them about their research portfolio in September. Maybe you could speak to some of the organizations, or maybe just more conceptually, you've already spoken about the communities as well, about who we should think about bringing to the table to keep building this conversation and make sure that we're kind of getting our arms around it.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and thanks for the opportunity to weigh in. ADAC is great, and they work from a very traditional security perspective. So it was the whole planning process was an interesting attempt to balance that more traditional notion of security and environmental security with ideas that I think security needs to be a broader construct. So we need to talk about human security, and that involves all kinds of things like the ability to know that your community is going to be there the next day and not washed away in a storm. It's about food security issues, which implicates ideas about community sovereignty, village tribal sovereignty. It implicates issues of public safety in a more traditional format. So you know, we've had a series of pieces, journalistic pieces up here in Alaska recently about domestic violence and sexual assault problems in communities. I think with this incredible seismic shift that we have just effectuated with regard to our budget, there's tremendous insecurity that's resulting. And frankly, again, when you look at things from a place-based perspective, that all becomes environmental security. And so I would just urge, as you're going through this, that you think non-traditionally, and again, beyond the folks that do the traditional security stuff, it's vital to have ADAC there. I would also suggest organizations like the Alaska Institute for Justice, who are working with communities to figure out relocation frameworks. You have Carolina on the phone, and you know, honestly, Carolina, you have no idea about this, but a lot of my thinking on this is informed by a couple of sentences that I got to hear you utter in a meeting that we were both in a long time ago, and just about the importance of community-driven agendas when you're dealing with researchers. that, the ability of a community and individuals in a community to feel like they can wake up the next day and have their basic needs met, including where they're living, how they're eating, the fact that they're physically safe in their homes and in their villages. All of that is inherent and very, very necessary when you're thinking about environmental security. So I would just urge a big, broad, expansive definition. There's also, I know that the Wilson Center has their Environmental Security and Change program, and a lot of the work that people like Jeffrey DeBelco have done thinking about how we expand notions of environmental security, I think could inform the contours of who you invite to the table in the future when you're thinking about this. And I think Mike Sfraga, who used to be up here and is now in DC at the Wilson Center, could potentially have some good ideas to think about in that sense as well.
Great, that's really helpful. Does anybody else on the call want to weigh in on that one, Carolina or others?
No, thank you. I think you're covering everything very well. It honestly is everything that we would be saying. So, yeah, I think it covers very well. Just that, and I think it's something that we've talked about a lot with a lot of people in this group. In talking about what it means to take that food security lens, means really what variables are we thinking about, and how are those what do those relationships mean? And so I think that was a really strong point that is made, that when we're talking about security, we have to make sure that we're understanding what those relationships are from an Indigenous perspective, because that really needs to inform how we're addressing these issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Carolina. Any final thoughts on this, Kelly? I think we're probably kind of coming up to the close on our discussion time, if that's.
Yeah, we're just about there. So if there are any last comments, otherwise, Sandy, I'll hand the reins back over to you to talk about some SAON updates.
Okay, great. Well, Martha, oh, sorry, please.
No, really, truly, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to talk with you about this, and just encourage you. It sounds like you're doing incredible work. I'd love to be engaged as you move forward in any way that you think might be helpful. But thank you all so much for the great, great work that you're doing.
Thank you, Mara. It was really a pleasure to hear from you, and we'll look forward to hearing from you in our future calls.
Terrific. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mara. Awesome.
And maybe if you could put the agenda back up, and I just want to make sure that I'm hitting the right timing and doing things in the right order. Our next update in general, we were going to, I was going to provide just a brief update on some things that are happening at the international level with the Sustaining Arctic Observing Networks group, which is sort of our international counterpart for what we're doing through IARPC, and also the IARPC observing team, and also US SAON. SAON has recently been named, I'll speak first to this Horizon 2020 proposal opportunity that's just come out from the European Commission, and how it relates to SAON, and touch on some issues with Arctic GEOSS, and provide just a really brief update on the SAON road mapping process, which we've spoken about in this venue before. So the SAON roadmap, as we've mentioned, is a process that SAON's seeking to better define in order to engage more partnership and contributions from especially funded proposals that can come in and help SAON kind of guide the scope and emphasis and requirements for the future Arctic observing and data system, both. The US SAON effort is part of helping SAON fulfill this roadmap. Some of the efforts that Hayo Aiken has described in this venue before are related to more proposal-driven efforts to come in and try and help SAON fulfill this vision. And so a few weeks ago on the, from the European Commission, a call for proposals under Horizon 2020 came out with a scope of $15 million for large consortia to come in working with, in partnership with SAON, to develop Arctic observing system services. And the system services development concept would relate back to the information delivery systems of the Group on Earth Observations. And so that's why you see this Arctic GEOSS acronym, is because Arctic GEOSS is sort of this conceptual notion of a collection of value-added public services that would come out of the Arctic observing system and feed into the broader work of the Group on Earth Observations. And so SAON's role in this as a partner is really going to be expressed through the work that it's been doing with the Arctic societal benefit areas, and also the work that it's been doing on its roadmap guidelines or specifications. So a draft of those guidelines is going to be coming out in August for review and comment. If you're interested in providing review and comment on those guidelines, please contact me. We're very open to hearing from as many people as possible during that process. I will highlight that, you know, kind of getting back to this topic of community, the need for community involvement in the design and development of observing systems, that among the guiding principles of SAON is included this notion of working in collaboration and partnership with communities in developing observing systems. And that's also true of what we're proposing for filling out the roadmap itself. That what we envision is that we would be, SAON itself would be serving as an advisory body to expert panels to help better define Arctic observing variable requirements in support of societal benefit. And one of the things that we'll really emphasize and underscore as we're reviewing those proposals is that the right people are at the table making those decisions on what the scope of those requirements should include. And so from our international partners, our partners in Europe, for those of you who are active in this space, you should also know that within the Horizon 2020 program call, it also, in addition to partnering with SAON, has some really explicit language that these groups should reach out and seek partnerships with proposals that were awarded under Navigating the New Arctic from the National Science Foundation. And so if you are someone who has written one of these proposals, is working under the Navigating the New Arctic concept, or soon will be, that I would encourage you to, if you don't know who are leading these consortia, please again reach out to me and I'll put you in touch with the consortia leaders so you can talk about potential space for collaboration on that work. So I think that's most of what I wanted to say on those points, but I'm happy to field questions directly now. If you want to, if you've got some kind of more proposal-oriented ideas that you'd rather talk with me about, or somebody else on the SAON board with more one-on-one, we're also happy to help with facilitating those partnerships with these new consortia. So any questions based on that readout? Okay, so hearing none, again, I would say that if you are interested in providing some review comments on the task force, just send me an email and we'll make sure we get your name on the reviewer list for that. I believe in August now, we're going to be doing our joint meeting with the data team. Our joint meeting with the data team is normally when we really unpack and dig into the details on these international aspects of our work and kind of combining the observing system view with the data team view. So if this is something you want to learn more about in general, please join us for our August meeting, because we're going to be talking about this in much greater depth than this more quick readout. All right, thanks. And Kelly, back to you.
Awesome, thank you for that, Sandy. So it's been a little while since we've met, so we wanted to go around the room and see if anybody had any updates to share. Anybody? Bueller?
Kelly, do you want to share about the upcoming DBO cruise?
Yeah, so I'm heading out on the DBO cruise that's leaving out of Nome on August 2nd. We'll be out for 22 days hitting all of the DBO lines. I'm on Jackie Greenmeyer's Benthic team, so I'm really excited to get a little muddy. We'll be doing a variety of different sampling, so there's sediment sampling, zooplankton toes, there's a seabird person aboard, hab sampling. I'm sure I'm missing some other things. There's CTD casts for physical oceanography parameters. Yeah. So we'll be going out of Nome up through the Bering Strait, up into the Chukchi, and maybe touching the Beaufort a little bit, and then coming back down. So while we're up there, we're actually going to be turning over some moorings for some Jamstep PIs up near the Chukchi Beaufort interface. So that'll be really interesting to see how mooring gets turned over. I'm going to be in Nome for a couple of days leading up to leaving on the feeling. So if anyone has any recommendations for who to contact and who to meet, I'd love to hear. You can email me or send me a chat message. Yeah, that's all I have.
And I wanted to add to that, Kelly, thank you, that the Marine Ecosystems team on August 28th will be having kind of a field season report out. So Jackie will be describing what their observations were on the DBO this year. So if you're interested in hearing about that, the end of August will be that meeting.
Hey, this is Sarah. I just want to let everybody know that our collaboration team leads met in Alaska June 5 and 6. We had a really great 2 days of meetings, and the teams have produced their annual plans for the year. And Meredith and Kelly are finishing the layout and coordination of all those teams, and a master calendar will be posted pretty soon, and you'll start to see new team meetings being advertised on the website. So keep your eyes open for that. We'll also make sure people know that the master calendar is there, and things do change as the year goes along, but it might be informative to you. For a lot of us, we were on a previous call, a really interesting call about surveying marine mammals. And it just leads me to think about how much overlap there is between all of these activities. And we do our best, particularly Meredith and Kelly, in trying to coordinate the team activities so that you know when something of interest will be coming along. And I encourage you to post anything that you're doing as well on the website to share that information out. And one final note, I think Renee Crane's on the line, but I'm going to put in a plug to this group. Renee chairs the Field Operations Working Group, and there is a matrix of where all the vessels will be for this field season. And so I'll put the link to that in the chat box if anybody's interested. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Kelly, it's Roberto. I have one little addition to the DBO updates. Jackie Redmeyer sent me a link to a series of articles based on DBO research supported by NSF and others that are in a recent issue of Deep Sea Research too. Topical Studies in Oceanography, and all those papers are available for free download until August 14th. So I'll just put the link in the chat box for folks who are interested.
Thanks, Roberto, and I'll make sure to post those in the notes, and maybe you can post a comment on the event page, or
I posted already to IARPC collaborations.
Okay, perfect.
Yesterday, not this morning. Yep.
This is Twyla. I just wanted to raise for people again the Arctic Futures 2050 meeting that's coming up at the beginning of September, and I'm hoping that everyone on the call is already aware of it and hopefully registered. Registration does remain open. We've passed the early bird deadline, but it's not an unreasonable cost, and the full program is available to browse on the conference website too, and they really have done a good job of getting people from the policy side as well as Indigenous knowledge holders to come and participate in panels and discussion. And so I think that is another place where the kinds of conversations we're having today, where we're thinking about Arctic observing not just kind of connections to the physical environment, but to these other important spaces, will be a topic of discussion, and be great to see people there bringing it up. That's all.
Thanks. Twyla, I wanted to also say that if anybody did not see Twyla's testimony to Congress, was it last week? It's a really impressive panel they pulled together, and was it specifically on sea level rise or just general of Greenland?
Specifically on glacial and ice sheet melt. And as you can imagine, sea level rise was one of the primary impacts of interest to the panel, but people can find the full hearing. I can put a link in here, but everyone's written testimony and then the full recording of the Q&A is available online.
Great. And Twyla, did you post that to IARPC?
I don't think I did, but I can add that to the message board.
Okay, that would be wonderful. Thanks, and thanks for doing that. I think it's a great example of how search has been very high impact in the policy space.
Thanks for Sandy and Twyla for bringing that up. Twyla, one of the things we note is that sometimes people feel funny about posting their own activities, and so they reach out for us to do it. I think it's not an issue, and you should go ahead and post it so people can easily find it. Thank you.
Okay, I'll put it on my to-do list. Thanks.
Well, I think NASA's going to get some phone calls about continuing Operation Icebridge after that testimony, because several of you mentioned it.
Yeah, it definitely served some purposes that are not now being completely covered by the satellites going up. So it will be interesting. I'm very curious to see how much legislators were listening and what will come of it.
Yep.
Okay, are there any other updates from around the room? All right, well, I think we'll give you guys back a couple minutes of your time. Like Sandy mentioned earlier, our next meeting is going to be joint with the Arctic Observing Team, with the Arctic Data Team, on August 29th, which is the data team's normal meeting time. So it's not the normal observing time slot at 1 p.m. Eastern or 9 a.m. Alaska time. And hopefully we'll be hearing an update on efforts of the roadmap and how all of that is coming together. So thank you all so much for spending your time with us today, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you next time.